Okay, folks, the tyranny is here. It's no longer a cautionary tale. I want you to listen to this grotesque person, Liz Cheney, who has sold out her values, sold out her party, sold out the constitutional republic. She is now fully engaged in an effort to turn the United States into a third world republic where the opposite party in power, the Democrats, Liz Cheney is effectively a full-blown Democrat right now. Liz Cheney is now using the power and force of government and the congressional subpoena power to not only get a hold of private text messages between people, but she wants to read them in public now to make sure if you're a conservative, that don't you dare communicate with other conservatives before the next election, because we could subpoena you and we're going to read them out loud. Now, I'm not going to read the text. She had text from Sean Hannity and Laura Ingraham and Brian Kilmeade to Mark Meadows. I'm not going to read the text because you know what? It's none of it's none of our business what Kilmeade and Ingraham and Hannity may have said to Mark Meadows. But it proves a point that the January 6th incident, what happened there, that everyone was surprised by it. So Liz Cheney doesn't even realize she's making the opposite point, that this wasn't a planned insurrection, because she's a moron. But here's Liz Cheney talking about why she feels the need to subpoena. She's not a law enforcement officer, the opposing party, because she's a Democrat now, their communications. Listen to this filth.
We are here to address a very serious matter: contempt of Congress by a former chief of staff to a former president of the United States. We do not do this lightly, and indeed, we had hoped not to take this step at all. For weeks, as the chairman noted, we worked with Mr. Meadows' counsel to reach an agreement on cooperation. But shortly before his scheduled deposition, Mr. Meadows walked away from his commitment to appear and informed us he would no longer cooperate. We believe Mr. Meadows is improperly asserting executive and other privileges, but this vote on contempt today relates principally to Mr. Meadows' refusal to testify about text messages and other communications that he admits are not privileged. He has not claimed and does not have any privileged basis to refuse entirely to testify regarding these topics.
Okay, what she just said there is filth. It's filth. Liz Cheney is a sellout, and Liz Cheney is a fraud. And to the voters who voted for Liz Cheney, I'm begging you. It's not only important that Liz Cheney lose her seat. Liz Cheney must lose her seat by a massive margin to send a message to these tyrants, these people who want to abuse the power of Congress to act like de facto law enforcement agents to target the opposition party, the Republicans, that you will lose. You have been rejected. The voters don't like you. Liz Cheney must lose by double digits. This is a sellout and a fraud. She should be immediately removed from the Republican caucus, stripped of her committees, and never be allowed by a Republican again to use and tarnish our label. She can run as whatever she wants, but no Republican should ever vote for this fraud again. Make no mistake what she's doing. The January 6th committee has one purpose and one purpose only: to act as an extra constitutional body, a supra-constitutional body beyond the powers of the Constitution, to target Republicans and to target their communications, to scare them, as I warned you a year ago before the 22 election. I warned you about this, to not dare text each other or communicate, because we will get your communications, we will get your texts, and we will read them in front of the American public, which is what she did to Hannity, Kilmeade, and Laura Ingraham, who had texted Mark Meadows on the 6th saying, hey, what's going on? You got to shut this down. The odd part about that is Liz Cheney doesn't realize that she's trying to make the point, because she's a full-blown liberal Democrat right now, this scammer. She's a full-blown liberal Democrat using communist tactics to target her political opposition. What Liz Cheney doesn't realize is she's making the opposite case than she thinks she's making. Didn't you, Guy, remember the planned insurrection? Joe, remember that? It was a planned insurrection. I thought that was the narrative. That was the narrative. I'm not crazy, right?
No, you're cool.
This was a planned insurrection, meaning there was planning, right? That's what that means.
Yep.
If it was a Moneyball theory, right? If it was a planned insurrection, then where are the plans? We'd like to see that, which is odd because some of the players Liz Cheney's trying to embarrass by reading their text to Mark Meadows seem to be indicating by their text they had no idea what was going on January 6th. Either did Meadows, which is kind of weird for a planned insurrection, isn't it?
Amen.
Planning. When you plan something, like when you plan a surprise party, it's not really a surprise other than the person who's the subject of the party, right, Joe? Just check it.
Yeah, sounds like a plan. Yeah.
So if Joe was throwing me a surprise party for my 47th birthday a few weeks ago. Joe's not surprised by the party too. Just me. I'm just checking because Liz Cheney seemed surprised that Hannity, Ingram, and Kilmeade were surprised, including Don Jr. too. I thought it was a planned insurrection, showing you what an idiot Liz Cheney is. An idiot. An idiot. You may be asking yourself common sense questions right now, like where does Congress get the authority? This tyrant, Liz Cheney, get the authority to steal people's personal communications, which are likely privileged. Mark Meadows was the chief of staff to President Trump. Where does she get the authority to do this? Liz Cheney's not a law enforcement officer. She's not even bright. She's a moron. Where does she get the authority to do this? Well, Congress does have subpoena authority, but they only have subpoena authority for things that have some legislative intent. So in other words, if they were going to pass some kind of banking legislation, Congress, and they needed people from the banks to come up and testify about something they wanted to legislate, according to some Supreme Court rulings in the past, they can subpoena them to come up, those bank executives. Everybody understand?
Yeah.
This is very important.
Yeah.
It needs to have a legislative intent. These are not law enforcement subpoenas. Liz Cheney's not a law enforcement officer. She's not even a smart person. So if they're investigating this as a, quote, planned insurrection, yet everybody involved in the planned insurrection doesn't seem to have planned for the insurrection and seems to have been surprised by the insurrection, and they're investigating a planned insurrection as a, what, legislative affair? No, they're investigating it as a law enforcement affair. An act of treason, which is weird because Congress doesn't have that authority at all.
You just heard the Dan Bongino Show.